Hi folks, Adam Andrews here from CenterForLit with another small contribution to a great conversation. Today's topic, 2 ways Christians read literature wrong and what to do about it. One day recently, I taught Jack London's story To Build a Fire to a class of Christian parents. It's a harrowing description of a man's struggle for survival in the sub-zero temperatures of the Yukon Territory, and Jack London's most famous piece. The story's protagonist, who's referred to only as the man, has been warned about the dangers of extreme cold. And yet, as the story opens, he foolishly begins a day-long hike on foot toward a distant mining camp, accompanied only by his dog. As the temperature falls, the man slowly realizes that he is engaged in a life-or-death struggle against the cold. It'll take careful planning and foresight to survive. Unfortunately, the man is plagued with bad luck from the start. He accidentally steps in an icy stream. He builds a fire to dry himself, but stupidly locates it beneath a snow-laden tree. The fire's heat dislodges the snow from an overhanging branch, which falls on the fire and puts it out. By the time he arranges wood for another fire, his hands are too cold to manipulate the matches. A dull sense of dread overtakes him as he realizes that he has miscalculated both the cold and his own powers to withstand it. He tries to kill his dog so that he can use the body for warmth, but the animal senses his fear and won't let him approach. In the end, the man quietly freezes to death, while the dog slinks off to find another, wiser master. The end. After this discussion was over, one parent approached me with a familiar reaction. "This book doesn't seem to have any Christian lessons in it," she said. "It's disturbing. It's full of hopelessness and despair. Is there a way to redeem this story, or at least understand it better by reading it from a Christian perspective?" Now, she was absolutely correct in her initial observation. Of course, there aren't any obvious Christian lessons in To Build a Fire, because the story was written by an atheist as a faithful expression of his own naturalistic worldview. It is disturbing and full of hopelessness and despair because the author wanted it that way. The parent's question about redeeming the story revealed error number 1, however, looking for lessons. She assumed that the trick of reading from a Christian perspective involves finding Christian lessons in a story where none seem apparent at first. In other words, reading like a Christian means reading Christianity into everything you read. We parents and teachers often do this when we mine classic literature for examples of godly character traits for our students to emulate, or ungodly ones for them to avoid. We do this when we use the man in To Build a Fire as an example of some character flaw, laziness, lack of planning, carelessness, arrogance, and say to our kids, "You see what happens when you ignore good advice?" I think this is a big mistake. Obviously, it's important to work hard and plan ahead and heed sound advice. The problem with using To Build a Fire to teach these lessons is that they flatly contradict the point that Jack London was trying to make with his story. The importance of diligence and humility are our ideas, not his. London's point is that the man could not possibly have worked hard, planned ahead, or listened to the advice offered him. He was doomed before he even started by deterministic forces utterly beyond his control, from the merciless cold to his own inherited lack of imagination. Furthermore, the man's lack of character had absolutely nothing to do with his failure, because the concepts of character and morality are absent from To Build a Fire. London's message is that you are stuck within the limitations of your species, and there's nothing you can do about it but die. To Build a Fire was intended to be a dark story devoid of moral lessons. When we use it to teach such lessons anyway, we misread the story on purpose. And in the process, we teach our students to ignore the author's words and substitute words of their own, and eventually to remake every book they read into the sermon they heard last Sunday. In his book, An Experiment in Criticism, C.S. Lewis warns us against this error in words that could easily have been directed to well-meaning teachers of To Build a Fire or any non-Christian story. He says this, "We are so busy doing things with the work that we give it too little chance to work on us. Thus, increasingly in our reading, we meet only ourselves. But you might say, why does it really matter if we use an author's words for our own ends? We parents are trying to teach Christian morality to our students. Doesn't this all-important end justify whatever means we choose? Well, not in this case, for the means involve breaking the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. When we use a story like To Build a Fire to teach moral lessons that the author did not intend, we tell a lie about him, making him out to be someone he wasn't. Worse yet, we make our students complicit in the lie, even teaching them to tell lies of their own. Some moral lesson that is. The Epistle of James in the New Testament, which was intended to teach moral lessons, exhorts us to be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath. This is the very heart of what it means to read like a Christian. Let the author say what he means to say, and don't interrupt. Again, Lewis puts it best. The first demand any work of art makes upon us is surrender, he says. Look, listen, receive. Get yourself out of the way. There's no good asking first whether the work before you deserves such a surrender, for until you have surrendered, you cannot possibly find out. Well, you may well ask, what good is To Build a Fire then? If it's dark and depressing and hopeless, but it cannot be redeemed by reading Christian values into it, why in the world should we read it? Why indeed? Let's use another story to suggest an answer. Ernest Hemingway's prize-winning 1953 novella, The Old Man and the Sea. It opens on Santiago, an ancient fisherman who is mired in an epic streak of bad luck. He hasn't caught a fish in many days. So many, in fact, that he is near starvation and has been shunned as cursed by the other fishermen in the small village. The novel tells the story of his last voyage, in which he travels farther out into the sea than anyone has ever dared and catches the greatest fish in history. As a master fisherman, Santiago draws on his expert knowledge and long experience to hook the giant fish, who then drags the tiny boat out into the heart of the sea. A long and weary struggle ensues, during which both fish and fishermen reach the limits of their endurance. When Santiago finally reels the exhausted fish to the boat days later, he finds that it is too big to bring on board, and he must lash it to the gunwales for the long journey home. Before he can reach the safety of the village, however, the boat is beset by sharks who strip the fish to the bone, leaving nothing but a skeleton. Though Santiago's skill and endurance have enabled him to best the fish and have brought him to the very brink of salvation, he is finally undone by a cruel twist of fate. Or, you might say, by a universe that does not care to reward qualities like skill and endurance. Santiago arrives on shore empty-handed and calmly accepts his defeat as the story ends. Now, teachers and students often thoroughly enjoy The Old Man and the Sea. It's beautifully written, a fine example of Hemingway's spare, direct style. And its main character deserves the iconic status that he's enjoyed since the book's publication. At the same time, parents interested in reading this novel from a Christian perspective will have trouble divining Christian themes in its pages. The reason for this, of course, is that just as with To Build a Fire, the story wasn't intended to communicate Christian themes. As a matter of fact, Hemingway makes some rather direct assaults on Christianity in The Old Man and the Sea, leaving little doubt about his animosity towards God and religion. A close reading of the novel reveals that its themes spring from nihilism, a philosophy based on the atheistic assumption that there is no purpose or significance to life. As we've just said, trying to make a story like this reflect Christian themes is the exact opposite of reading like a Christian, because it involves telling a lie about the author and his work. It is therefore tantamount to breaking the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness. But back to the question at hand, if we don't reinterpret Hemingway so that his book teaches Christian lessons, aren't we just letting a godless atheist have the last word? What's the point of teaching this book to our students if we can't manipulate it to fit our Christian worldview? Why should we Christians even bother reading it or teaching it? C.S. Lewis, again, offers a profound answer to this question in a single sentence of his classic Experiment in Criticism. He says, "My own eyes are not enough for me. I would see through those of others." Lewis realized that anyone who has never read widely is liable to become a prisoner of narrow and weakly held opinions, because his experience is limited by his own time and place. The one who participates in great literature, on the other hand, encounters the opinions of a host of other thinkers. He can see the consequences of their ideas without having to adopt their philosophies himself. In the process of comparing his assumptions with those of others, his own worldview gains strength and clarity. In short, he has an opportunity for a real education in philosophy, all from the comfort of his home. Okay, but wait a minute. Some parents worry that exposure to non-Christian philosophies and literature, especially if they are not reinterpreted along Christian lines, may threaten the fragile faith of our students. Now, this is an understandable concern, but consider that the godless philosophies we encounter in our reading do not make us godless, any more than the homelessness we encounter in books makes us homeless. If I know how to read closely and interact properly with the stories I read, then reading The Old Man and the Sea will not make me a nihilist, any more than reading Huckleberry Finn will make me an irreligious vagabond. But it will do something. What it will do is give me a deep understanding of the problem of nihilism and the tragic results of denying the existence and revelation of God. The Old Man and the Sea can give me insight into the unanswered questions of the nihilist that all the Christian stories in the world cannot give. In fact, there is no better way to understand nihilism than to read a book that springs from nihilistic assumptions. Not a book by someone trying to debunk nihilism, or a book where nihilistic philosophy is the subject matter, but a book where nihilism is the unspoken worldview of the author. Hemingway was no expert on Christian principles, but he knew nihilism inside and out. And while it would be foolish for us to look to him for guidance on the one, his books can teach us worlds about the other. But why would we even want to understand nihilism in this way? Perhaps it's not dangerous, you might say, but is it desirable? Do we even want our students to do it? Well, Ernest Hemingway was not the last nihilist. He was only the most eloquent one. And he spoke for thousands upon thousands of people who have lost their way and denied God, many of whom live today and interact regularly with us and with our students. In books like The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway beautifully explains the source of the pain and despair that plague our neighbors, better perhaps than they can explain it themselves. And this is the other profound implication of Lewis's statement. In allowing us to see the world through the eyes of others, literature broadens our understanding and so enables us to have compassion for a lost world. Examining an author's book to understand the source and implications of his worldview always enables us to relate more effectively to those who share that worldview. When we are able to be quick to hear and slow to speak in our reading, we can demonstrate those qualities in our relationships as well. And in the end, when we really read like Christians, we're able to communicate the love of God more effectively to our neighbors. I hope this has been thought-provoking. Let me know in the comments below, and meanwhile, like and subscribe for more. And if you're interested in joining the conversation at Center for Lit, click the link in the description below. Happy reading, everyone!